Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power coming to you on a beautiful early February day here in Tbilisi, Georgia. And it is time to explain a little bit about my life here in Georgia. Normally I show you things, take you places, but I decided what I would do today is discuss two things that I think you might find interesting. If you read the title of this video, you already know that I've been here for 4 years. And so I thought I would review what my time has been like here. And the other question I get all the time is, why did you decide to go to Tbilisi, Georgia, or just to live in the country of Georgia in the first place? And I am sure right now, there may be a few I've trapped into watching this video who are expecting me to talk about boiled peanuts and Georgia on my mind and the devil went down to Georgia and Athens, and I don't mean Greece, and Atlanta. No, it's not that Georgia. It's the Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains. So let's start. Before we do, just a reminder, a couple things. Do subscribe to the channel. I do need more subscribers. And mercy sakes alive, a nice Georgian phrase, I think that I have not had one person from this channel ever contribute to the channel. You could be the first. There's a PayPal link down below. Think about it. Wouldn't it be nice? And if you decide to become a contributor to the channel, here's what I'll do. I'll give you Georgian music. I have all these files that are just filled with Georgian music that's impossible for you to find, and I'll send you a whole bunch of them. See the end of the video for details. But anyway, forget about that. For now, let's get back to the important thing. Why Georgia? Why did I decide to leave Georgia? Well, I grew up in California. I did a little bit of European traveling. I ended up living in New York City for 16 years. And then I lived in Alaska for 22 years. Now, if you do a little bit of research on how far Alaska is from Georgia, depending on the time of year, because Georgia doesn't go into daylight saving time, they're either 12 or 13 hours off. So in other words, we're on the exact opposite side of the globe. Not exactly in terms of hemispheres, but certainly in terms of time zones. So Georgia, for most of my life, has not been on my radar at all, just as it is not on most people's radar. I do remember back in the 1980s when I used to work at these record stores in New York City. I worked in a very large record store called J&R Music World, which was essentially it was one of the largest record stores in New York at that time. I was in charge of buying vinyl, LPs, for the store, and this was just at the period before CDs came in. CDs were just starting to come in as I left. But I was in charge of all the music that was kind of strange. So among my categories was international music, as we then called it. There was no such thing as world music yet. And one of the records we got from the Okora label out of France was songs from Georgia. Georgie, as the album title said. And I listened to it and I thought, this is wild. They're kind of yodeling or something there. And it was the only record I'd ever seen from Georgia, and the only record through up until 2012 that I would ever see from Georgia. So I didn't really think about it much. I just thought, very interesting. I didn't recognize then what kind of Georgian music it was. I now recognize that it was essentially Gurian music. The region of Guria has a very unusual harmonic vocal style, which includes something like a yodel in it, kind of a going back and forth in the octaves with the voice. And it was always fascinating to me because the only three places on earth I could think about that had yodeling were the Swiss and the Swiss Alps, Austria, a bit of Bavaria, and then on the other side, then down in Central Africa, there was a pygmy tribe that yodeled, and Georgia. So that was all I knew about Georgia. That was all I knew about Georgia. That was all anybody knew about Georgia. Every now and then you'd hear in the news, there's a place called Georgia. Or, there was that reference in the Beatles song USSR, where he says, those Georgian women are always on my mind. And so, but then, Georgia, you just knew it was someplace in the Soviet Union that, I don't know, maybe I saw the chokha, the traditional garb. I maybe would have recognized that, but more than just Georgia wears that, they wear it on the other side of the Caucasus as well. So yeah, it didn't exist in my mind. Now, what did exist in my mind was music. Like I said, I worked in a very large record store. I wasn't there by accident. I was there to learn about music history. And I got to know thousands upon thousands of records. I was working on, and I still am working on a project about the history of popular music in the 20th century. And I need to get my stuff written before I die. I am not young. But I can tell you a lot about music. One of the things I can tell you is that in the general Middle Eastern area, there are certain kinds of sounds. For instance, there's an Arabic sound, which interestingly enough has no real harmonies. You could get an orchestra of 40 people playing together, and you're not going to hear any harmonies. You'll hear some very complex rhythms. But what will happen is all the string section will kind of all follow the same notes all together. And occasionally get this kind of drippy effect because they all don't get there exactly at the same time. I like that drippy kind of the music kind of sliding into each other. But it's not really a harmony. The Jewish people come from this area, and their cantorial music still has a lot of elements from the ancient past in it, their religious music. And one of the things I knew about both of those things is that the music reflects the religion. So I thought to myself, well, this was around 2012, I started thinking to myself, I'm not even sure what even prodded this thought so much. It's something I'd thought about before, but I suddenly said, Georgia. But what I realized was that the Arabic music, in that lack of harmony, was expressing the Islamic principle that God is one. And it's very specific, one. Whereas the Jewish notes, which were very similar, both of them have a kind of a, what I call a bittersweet sort of sound, which sound very different from the major minor chords of Central and Western Europe. And I thought to myself, it's very interesting that they have similarities, and yet the Jewish music is two things at once that are very different from most Islamic music. And one is an extreme sense of sorrow. You can really hear the tragedy of the Jewish story in particularly their religious music. The other sense is a sense of joy and a sense of humor. Now, and maybe my ears don't do me justice, I don't hear a sense of humor portrayed that much in that kind of a way in Islamic music. It's just life. I'm sure they have a sense of humor. It's just that the music doesn't express it any more than it's expressed that much in Russia. But the Jewish music certainly is capable, even with their minor modalities, of expressing humor. Well, then I said to myself, okay, so if there's Christians in the Middle East, or if there were, which there were many more before Islam, they would have to sing, for one thing, in multiple harmonies, and another thing, their sound would sound similar but very different. Now, there are Syrian Christians who do very beautiful music, and I've found some since then, which is very different, and expresses. See, one of the things about the Christian view is it expresses a sense of resolution because of the resurrection. So all Christian music from Christian countries has, for instance, the music will build to tell a story and then resolve. Whereas there's resolution in the other forms of music too, but it's a different kind. I'm not going to go into that much more in detail. So I said to myself, okay, it's got to have harmonies. It would have to approach the melody, the same kind of melodies, but approach them differently. And then it would have to have resolutions to the music. And then I kind of remembered something about the Georgian stuff. And I said, well, it's not really the Middle East. The Caucasus is a very different kind of place, and yet it's connected to the Middle East. It's certainly been influenced by the Middle East. And then I realized, oh yeah, they seem to be Christians. So let's listen to that. So I went on YouTube and started finding music. And I found so many different kinds of YouTube videos. This is what started me on it. Obviously, we're not talking about, new electronic music, which they make in Georgia, or pop music, which unfortunately they make in Georgia. And I'm talking about commercial bad stuff. That's pretty global these days. I'm talking about people just sitting around at tables singing. I'm talking about people like dancing at a get-together. I'm talking about things that are basically in some way or another traditional. Well, the more I found, the more I got interested in this country. And I just said, well, this is a very interesting place. They seem to be doing some things very differently. And at the same time, I heard influences from the Middle East, but also from Russia, from Eastern Europe, from Greece, from, a variety of countries in the music. Yet at the same time, there seemed to be an essence that was very peculiarly, I love that word, peculiarly, my mouth isn't quite there this morning, is quite specifically Georgian. So that's what started me on researching it. And after a while, I started collecting videos, downloading them from YouTube. I have hundreds of them now. And then what I also started doing was looking for albums of the music. I did not understand the situation in Georgia at that point, in which the album had practically disappeared because they had gone from essentially the late 20th century, when albums were still a thing, and there are older Georgian albums from the Soviet era, and then they went into a period of chaos during the 90s and civil war. And then they came out in extreme poverty, and the Russian stores that sold the Melodia records had all left. And so they went straight to the internet, and people just started downloading music, killing off, unfortunately, a lot of the music industry. I mean, yeah, there are people out there with stuff that I'm sure is on Spotify, but essentially killing off the heart of what is the music industry in so many places, certainly in Europe, and is still there, although in a very different way because of downloading, streaming, the internet, files, Spotify, all the rest of it, Apple, iTunes, and the rest of it. All of that essentially showed up just as they were getting back on their feet financially in the middle of the aughts. So there we are. It's a very strange situation. I had gone out and found Georgian music, and there are CDs to be had. I probably got about 20 or 30 of them. They will still be made, but there's no real store to go find them. There's like one or two places. One place that sells electronica. Well, that doesn't help me because it usually sounds nothing like Georgian music. And electronica to me tends to sound the same in every country that it's popular, with some minor versions. And then one thing I did do is I said to myself, I'd like to really visit this place. One of the things that happened was I got more interested in the country, so I started researching. I'd watch tourist videos. At that time, there weren't many videos. This was 2012. Hardly any videos of anyone visiting Georgia on YouTube. I mean, literally. Very, very few. I found everyone I could find. Now there are more, And unfortunately, they almost all do the same thing. Someone who's one of these digital nomads shows up in Georgia, or someone just taking a break, going around for a few months, shows up in Georgia. They go down, there's a triangle down near Liberty Square, there's a triangle down there where they cross the Peace Bridge, go take what's called the ropeway, the tramway, across up to the Mother of Georgia statue, and then come down there, walk through the bathhouses, walk up this one street back to Liberty Square. Maybe they'll walk up Rustaveli a bit, maybe go to an art museum or two, and that's about it. They'll look for the usual. They'll look for chinkali, the nice little dumpling. They'll look for khachapuri, different variations on kind of a cheesy, bready pizza type thing, and that's it. And that's what you'll see most of the time. Oh, of course, they'll be looking for wine. Now, I'm talking about these very specific kind of videos that do this. I'm not talking about every tourist does this. I'm saying that there's a kind of a video where people do the same things over and over. They come, they look at these things, they say, that's Georgia. And maybe they'll go into the mountains or heaven forbid, go to Batumi and see the big, ridiculous buildings there and not really understand Georgia. And well, I said to myself, my mother was getting old at the time. And more than just getting old, she was getting sickly. And she passed away in 2015. Now, one of the things I said to myself before she passed away, before she died, was that once she did pass away, I would go visit Georgia. Just because I think when you come to a major moment or a major tragedy in your life or a major difficulty, you shouldn't stay in the same place. You should add something new. You don't collapse into yourself. You open out and say, okay, well, this is a time, once the mourning period has passed, this is a time for something new. This is a time to look at the world in a different sort of way. So I said I would go to Georgia. Now, since 2012, I read Shota Rustaveli's Knight in Panther Skin. I had been reading about the history of Georgia. I had been ordering books off Amazon. I had found various compilations of Georgian music, not from Georgia, but from France and Germany and Japan and even America. So I had found enough music. I'd been finding books. I said to myself, okay, let's get the guidebook, Lonely Planet. They had Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan together. Let's go look. And then the Brat Guide to Georgia is probably the best one. And I even got a little book that helped me with the language, which I didn't learn, unfortunately, that much. But I knew that they had a strange script, a strange language, but I also knew that younger people and more people were learning English. So I said, okay, well, let's go do that. And in March and April of 2016, I came to Georgia for the first time, and I just went to Tbilisi. Now, if you know anything about Georgia, March and April, it's going to be very cold in the mountains. I wasn't interested in going to the mountains. A Georgian friend of mine once said, so why don't you want to go to the mountains? And this was during my first visit. And I said, well, I come from Alaska. We have mountains. He didn't really understand what I meant. Then eventually I showed him pictures, a few photos from Alaska, and he said, oh, I mean, where I lived in Haines, Alaska is literally surrounded by mountains. Not that the Caucasus Mountains are not on a must-see list. They are absolutely spectacular. But the point is, my first trip, I was interested in Georgian culture. There were three things I was interested in doing. One, looking for Georgian music, traditional music. Two, looking for the traditional dancing. And three, looking for puppetry, because also during this period, I was researching puppetry, and I figured puppetry would give me my best excuse for coming here, because I would look for puppeteers, And what I have found is in interviewing puppeteers throughout Europe in this long project called Gravity from Above, I would find people who would then help me to understand the culture, and indeed that is exactly what happened. So I met the people from Budragana Gagra, which is a hand shadow puppet troupe, and they do absolutely amazing hand shadows, including kind of abstract hand shadows too, like Bach pieces. Brilliant stuff. I also saw, actually, it was on the way here, I saw Rezo Gabriadze's, one of his plays in Paris, and unfortunately, I was not able to interview him because he was getting old and unfortunately has since passed away. And that's one of my regrets that I didn't get a chance to interview him. I also went and saw the Tbilisi State Puppet Theater, which did a great little puppet show called, which involved fire on the stage. I love puppet shows that have different elements like fire, water, oil, whatever. Not that oil is a major element, but you get the picture. There was a folk music school. Georgi Ushikashvili was the person behind that, and I had a chance to talk to him and get some interesting videos of people singing, which was just so moving to me to hear this music. And some of those videos have had thousands and thousands of views on my other channel, Gravity from Above. So I also went and met Nino Sukashvili and spent a couple of days watching the Sukashvili dancers. That was very special. And I walked around, I saw so much architecture and so many places. And I spent 3 weeks here all in Tbilisi. And I thought, this is really great. And it was also the kind of thing that really re-energized my creative imagination. And then I went back to Alaska and spent the summer working there in 2016. And the next year, I wanted to go back on the road and investigate more puppetry. I also wanted to come back to Georgia at some point. But in 2017, I found out that they were selling the house I had been renting for many, many years. And that put me at a dilemma. And the dilemma was, what do I do now? Where do I go now? And what happened was, without going, this is all a much longer story, but I'll make this part in particular very short. I realized that I could rent a place in Tbilisi fairly cheaply by American standards. I worked a lot in 2017 and made a lot of extra money working with tourism in the summer in Alaska. And I decided I had friends I could visit in Switzerland, friends I could visit in Paris, friends I could visit in Brussels. All of these places I could stay very cheaply. And then I said, well, let's go also visit Sicily and see the Sicilian marionettes. So basically, between that, I realized, I've got 6 months right there. I can go to Europe, spend 6 months there in Europe and in Georgia, and then come back and work the next year, and then try to decide my living situation at that point. Well, when I came to Georgia, again, I spent more time investigating puppetry and dance and the culture, and a lot more time spent with art. And then I got invited to do a job. And that job was working with the Museums Union here in Tbilisi that was in charge of about 9 different public museums, including the Doll and Puppet Museum. And so I got invited to come back and work with that. And so I said, that's it, I'm going to go move to Georgia. And so I went back to Georgia. So in 2018, I went back to Alaska and worked and made as much money as I could. And also there was another possible road of funding for my Gravity from Above documentary on puppetry in Europe. And I thought, great, I've got a job in Georgia, funding coming in for my documentary. Great. I've also learned in life that as an expression of faith, whenever you feel you really should do something really important comes along, that will be tested severely, as it was, since the funding for the documentary ended up not coming. And the job at the Museums Union was not what I thought it would be. And the good thing that did come out of that was I did get a residence permit for 5 years, which I'm still living on. So that is how I got here. The very short version. All of this is much more complicated, but that kind of tells you exactly how I got here. What has it been like in 4 years? Did I explain why I came? Well, I came for the music, the dance, and such, but I think I came for a much deeper reason. I came because it was time. Eagles, when they have their young fledglings, will they have these big nests, and they'll put all sorts of soft things like feathers and leaves and things on the bottom of the nest. But when they want the eagles to fly, they start pulling these things out so that what's left is the sticks below poking up, making it uncomfortable. And I think that's what happened in Alaska, particularly with my mother dying, obviously, but then losing the house I've been living in for 22 years. So, yeah, and there were many other things which are too personal to get into here, but yeah, I felt like, the feathers were leaving and it was time to go. And so that all contributed, as well as I felt Georgia represented something to me. It was a place to come and maybe I had something to share, which is one of the reasons I am trying, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, a nice American expression, to get my library here, which I have bits and pieces of whatever I've collected since I've been here in 4 years. But my real library is there because I have something to give people here. My feeling is that when I die, what do I want to happen to the library? Do I want my relatives in Seattle to have to deal with it? No, because they don't know what's going to happen. They wouldn't know what to do with all the stuff. I'd want it to go to one place where it will be meaningful, because it is meaningful. But we're not going to go there. But so I felt like I have something to teach, something to share here. But on the other hand, and by the way, I started doing videos seriously here. So that was one good thing that came out of it as well. But on the other hand, I realized there was much I could learn here. For one thing, I'm getting older, and one thing you want as you're getting older is something to keep your mind active. And living in Georgia, I'm always running into that. There's new words to learn, always. And these aren't simple words. There's new ideas. I mean, and I'm constantly running into social, cultural connections that make me say things like, I have no idea why they do that. And I'm constantly running into things that make me say things like, why do they do that? Why does this culture, why do the people here do these things that I have never experienced before? And I'm not going to go into, it's not just the cultural differences. I mean, sometimes it's just, I can't even begin at this point to explain all the differences that I have encountered since I've been here. But it's a lot. But not just that, there are ways of looking at the world that are very different. So Georgia has much to teach me. So I am here to give, but also to receive. And it just seems like a very good place to be for what I assume is the last portion of my life. Not that I plan on dying tomorrow, mind you, but, last 20 years or whatever. Let's do that. And I'm not really worried about whether I'll be able to stay here. As a friend of mine said to me the other day when I said, can I get you to write a letter in a year and a half or so when I need to go get my residence permit renewed? She goes, don't worry, I know the president. And I was like, okay, we'll just do that. It's amazing how many friends from different strata I have here. And plus there are people from other countries, expats, Americans, other people. It's been very fruitful as far as meeting people goes. I'm going to make this a 2-part video. And I think what I'll do in the next part is explain some of the things I've come to understand since I've been here, including there have been different periods. So there's that initial period, and I always find this true. This was true in New York City. This was true when I moved to Alaska. And it's true here. That initial phase is this, it's never quite what you thought it was going to be. And this was true when I first arrived here. It was true the second time I came, and it was true when I came to live, even more starkly so. So the first period was basically from December of 2018. I arrived on December 15th, so just over a month ago, in terms of anniversaries, and ended basically with the pandemic. There was that period there, which, again, I'm going to go into more depth on this stuff in the second one. Actually, what I'm doing is I did this whole why I decided to come, and then I realized that's going to be too long. So now I'm doing a two-parter. Such is life. The next period was indeed the pandemic, which for my reckoning ended in February of 2022, which basically I ended up in Prague. We didn't need masks anymore in Prague, except in a few stores and such like that. But basically, it felt over. And when I returned in Georgia, it just felt like we were mopping up, and basically the pandemic was done. I don't know how it was where you were. Wouldn't want to have been in China or Canada or even parts of America where there was a certain kind of mentality that gripped people. One of the things about being here during the pandemic was there was no panicked mentality that I could see, and I'll explain why next time. And then starting in February this year, well, actually we'll say January, because that's when I moved into this place. And so that's the third epoch, which is obviously not done, because it's not that I expect it to all change, and then I have to lose this place. Though you never know, life throws up all sorts of strange things. But anyway, so I've felt a sense, along with the culture, of things opening up again, of culture opening up again. And then there was the whole thing of the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All of which I will discuss in the next one, as well as giving you my 10 observations on what Georgia has been like and what I have seen and understood, things that have changed my perspective, which will include music and dance culture, puppetry and theater, discovering Georgian art, Georgians, the delicious and the indigestible. There are things that it's just like completely bizarre to me. The phenomena that I've learned realizing that it's Georgia, what that means. That's kind of a funny one. Cultural disappointments and corrections of my perspectives. Difficulties, which includes housing and trying to get my container here. What life is like just living daily life at home, and feeling at home. And then I'll also talk about Georgia becoming my normal world, where I'm still an American, and very deeply so. Obviously, I don't speak with any sort of Georgian accent. You wouldn't expect me to. But I now see out of the Georgian perspective more about the rest of the world. And future ideas and plans here in Georgia. So that's coming up next time. So thanks for coming along with me. I appreciate the time you've spent, and I hope some of this was interesting to you. And again, there will be part 2 where we dig more into what my 4 years has been like here in Tbilisi, Georgia, and also traveling to different parts of the country and such. So, as the Georgians say, Droebit, which means temporarily, we will meet again soon, and nachwamtis. Farewell, but goodbye. We will meet again.